For the next 2 hours, you're my wife. Clean, modest, and silent. He said it flatly, without a smile, as if ordering coffee. Susan straightened in surprise, clutching the damp cloth in her hands. The scent of air freshener, recently sprayed in the conference room, hit her face. Behind her was the trash can, her evening rounds barely begun. And the head of security's voice in her earpiece. In front of her stood a man in an expensive suit with a look that contained no request, only calculation. The payment will be twice your monthly salary. You don't need to speak, just sit beside me. He handed her a box. Black, with a pale blue dress inside. Susan didn't immediately find an answer. A silly thought circled in her head, I forgot to empty the bucket before my shift started. Is this a joke? She finally asked. This is a negotiation. Serious. I need to play a role. Your appearance is suitable, he said with an almost invisible smirk. A security guard appeared in the hallway, standing silently like a shadow. Decide. Time's running out, added Richard. She stood in the staff shower room looking at her reflection. She had pulled her hair into a strict bun. Makeup minimal, but clean. She and the woman in the mirror resembled each other, but weren't identical. I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm a janitor. But why do I suddenly feel like a professor again? Her fingers trembled as she fastened the strap on her shoes. Everything felt foreign. But something inside switched on, as if someone long asleep had opened their eyes. 20 minutes later she sat in the back of a black BMW, watching her reflection in the dark window. Richard sat beside her, flipping through documents. Don't be afraid, he said without looking up. No one will ask you anything. You just need to be seen. What if someone recognizes me? She quietly asked. He smirked. They don't know who you are. And you don't need to be anybody. Just be present. The car turned off the highway. A sign, Lakeside Country Club. Guarded grounds with tree-lined paths, lighting, and wrought iron gates. Premium vehicles in the parking lot. Susan walked behind Richard as if in another life. He introduced her. My wife. Former physician. Taking a break from medicine now. She nodded. Smiled. No one asked unnecessary questions. Only one of the partners muttered. You're always original, Rick. 8 people sat at the table. The negotiations concerned company mergers, delivery terms, legal intricacies. She remained silent but listened attentively, distinctly, as if back in the lecture hall. And suddenly a strange confidence appeared inside her. I can understand them, even if they don't want me to. Susan didn't make a single unnecessary movement. But she felt her gaze sliding over the lines, the phrases, the emphases. When you've spent years analyzing others' mistakes, you learn to hear what no one says aloud. Break. Richard approached, handed her a glass of water. Everything's going according to plan. You're excellent. Thank you, she replied. Strange feeling, he suddenly said, as if everyone's always known you. Susan didn't answer, just looked toward the window where the evening club lights reflected. Dinner continued. Waiters moved silently between tables, wine poured in thin streams, and light reflected in glasses so that each participant's face looked slightly softer. Conversations flowed quietly, with affected politeness. But beneath the rustle of napkins, tension could be felt. Millions hung in the air. Susan sat slightly apart, not drawing attention. Sometimes she lowered her eyes as if examining the silverware. But in reality, she listened carefully, thoughtfully, catching in speech not only the words but what lay between them. Richard's partner, a small, dry man around 50, spoke softly but with barbs. He repeatedly glanced toward Susan, as if wondering why she was there. Once he leaned toward his neighbor and half-whispered. Interesting choice. Can she even read? Richard pretended not to hear. Or didn't want to hear. Or perhaps just waited for the right moment. Soon dessert was served. The waiter accidentally touched the partner's hand, spilling a few drops of sauce on the table. Papers lying nearby almost fell to the floor. In the commotion, the secretary began gathering documents. One of the lawyers took a folder and handed it to Susan. "Could you read this aloud? Just to check the wording. Your voice is suitable." The phrase sounded almost like mockery. Someone smirked. One of those present made a hand gesture. Well, let her try." Richard looked at her appraisingly, with a touch of irony. "Try it." Susan nodded. She took the contract in hand. The paper was thick, glossy, pages crinkling under her fingers. She opened the first and began reading. Her voice was steady. Calm, almost academic. Intonation clear, emphasis precisely placed. The room gradually fell silent. The secretary froze. The partner removed his elbow from the table. One of the lawyers put down his fork. Susan finished reading the paragraph and suddenly paused. Something flashed across her face. Not surprise, more like concentration. She slowly reread the last line. Then once more, and calmly, without emotion, said, "There's a formulation here that, when literally interpreted, nullifies the points about asset equality." She turned the page, and here, in the preferential rights section, there's a mechanism allowing one party to challenge item 3 of the third block. If desired, of course. Pause. And the tax rate is listed according to the old tariff. It's different now. Silence followed, not thick, like before a storm. The partner frowned. His lawyer abruptly leaned toward the documents, took them from her hands, started flipping through something. Someone coughed. The secretary blushed. Richard didn't say a word, just watched. And in that gaze was neither mockery nor irritation. Only genuine attention. "I'm sorry," Susan said calmly, returning the papers. "I won't continue. It just caught my eye." The partner changed his expression, smirked. Dryly, tensely. "Well, you found yourself an assistant, Rick. A smart one." "By chance," answered Richard, still not taking his eyes off Susan. After the meeting, silence reigned in the car. Richard himself took the wheel, though usually a driver drove. He didn't turn on music, didn't speak first, only briefly said at a traffic light, "Do you understand that you just saved the deal?" Susan looked out the window. In the reflection she saw his face but tried not to linger her gaze. "I just noticed," she answered, "habit. I used to teach. I had a department chair. Then. Doesn't matter." He didn't answer, just nodded briefly. At the entrance, he got out and opened the door for her himself. "Thank you," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry for the beginning of the evening." She nodded, smiled, and then went into her home, slowly in that same dress, still neatly buttoned. That evening she didn't immediately take off her shoes, just stood at the window, looked at the city, and suddenly realized. Nobody had applauded her. But for the first time in many years, nobody had laughed when she began to speak. A week passed, then another. Susan returned to her usual life. Morning bus, cleaning tiles, the smell of disinfectant. At first glance, everything was the same. Only inside, something had already shifted. Lines from that very contract kept popping up in her head. Not because she wanted to return to that role. Just because her brain, like an old machine, had started up again and couldn't stop. She tried not to think about it. Shooed away thoughts like pesky flies. It was a coincidence. That's all. Incident closed. But coincidences, as it turned out, repeat themselves. 2 weeks after the end of her shift, she was handed a note. A simple white card with the company logo. Just one line, "If you have time, stop by office 306. At the appointed time, she went in. The door was ajar. Richard sat at the table. Not at the work desk, but at the side table where visitors were usually received. A thin folder lay before him. "Would you like to help?" he asked without looking up. "There are a couple of points I don't understand. Too convoluted. And you notice nuances well." Susan sat down without many words, flipped through and saw it again. An error in the tax breakdown, a discrepancy in wording, a hidden loophole. She explained calmly, without pushing. He listened, didn't interrupt. At the end, he quietly said, "Thank you, you've saved me another headache." After that, meetings became regular. Once a week, sometimes less often. He didn't offer to bring her back on staff. Didn't ask her to take a position. Everything seemed incidental. "Look at this, if it's not difficult. I'm just interested in your opinion. It's a small matter, but maybe you'll notice something." She read. Corrected. Helped. Initially cautiously, as if testing boundaries. And then with increasing confidence. Susan knew how the paper system worked. She didn't draw conclusions on emotions, didn't overplay, spoke briefly, and always to the point. Richard, meanwhile, changed, imperceptibly, almost undetectably. He started coming earlier than her, made tea, asked if the lighting was comfortable, listened attentively. Sometimes, if she began talking a little faster, he even took notes. "You used to teach, right?" he once asked. That was a story, she nodded, law school, evening division. He nodded in response. And didn't ask further. In the office, people started talking. First in whispers, then a bit louder. The janitor, who previously went unnoticed, now sat in the director's office correcting his papers. Some grimaced, others were surprised, but there were those who began to show respect. Susan felt this but didn't flaunt it, just continued working. After a month, Richard himself called her to the main office. 2 people from HR sat there. He said calmly, "I have an idea. Would you like to try yourself in a new role? Flexible schedule, no meetings, but with the salary of a second-category attorney." She didn't answer immediately, then looked up. "What if I want to help only you, without status, but with trust?" He smirked. Agreed. From that day, everything changed. Not sharply, gradually. She still went to the old floor, still greeted the old cleaning lady, still wore flat, comfortable shoes. But now she walked not with a bucket, but with a folder in her hands. Sometimes, walking down the corridor, she caught glances, but now without mockery. Now in these glances was respect or at least interest. Richard didn't impose, but began each new meeting with a question. "Are you comfortable? Am I not overloading you?" She smiled. "I'm managing." And she really was. For the first time in many years, she felt she wasn't living on the edge of the system, but inside it. That she was heard, that she was trusted, that she was again not just a worker, but a specialist. A woman with experience, with a voice, with a head. One late evening she remained alone in the office, finished checking. The night city flickered with lights like a cooling flame. And suddenly it occurred to her, I'm back where I wanted to be. Only now, without hustle, without fear, without rush. And this was the right place. Finally. Another 6 months passed. Now Susan's schedule contained meetings. Not cleaning, not shifts, not inventory requests, but meetings. She worked officially and was listed as a staff attorney. If something needed checking, they called her. If a document raised doubts, it was passed through the secretary. If Richard was delayed in the office, they guessed, again consulting with his woman of letters. That's what they called her in the office. Susan knew about this but wasn't offended. It wasn't mockery, rather an attempt to explain something that didn't fit the standard scheme. She didn't fit templates. And that was her strength. Now she lived a little differently. Before, her morning started with anxiety, waking up on time, catching the bus, checking whether the rag and utility closet keys were forgotten. Now she got up a little later, made oatmeal, listened to the radio, sometimes even exercised. She didn't seek recognition, but it came on its own. Once a new employee asked the security guard, "Who is that woman with the silver folder?" He simply answered, "She's the person whom even the director trusts documents without checking." Richard kept his word. He didn't impose, didn't cross boundaries, didn't play the savior. The relationship between them was respectful, calm. He knew if he called, she would come, but not by command, of her own free will. Sometimes he invited her to closed meetings, as a language consultant. Sometimes he simply sent a text, "Can this be said more simply?" And she found how, because she could. Once a month they had lunch together. Without unnecessary words. Without jabs. He didn't talk about that first meeting. And she didn't remind him, but once over coffee he said, "I could have lost a lot then," and added after a pause, "Thank you for coming with me, even though you didn't have to." Susan nodded and said nothing, because sometimes gratitude sounds better in silence. The contract she had corrected then worked. The deal went through. Richard strengthened his position, but most importantly, he changed. Not immediately, not radically, but he began to listen, to notice, to slow down. And Susan, she no longer hid herself, she didn't try to be someone else, she was simply herself, with knowledge, with experience, with quietness inside. According to the terms of the contract, which Richard did revise, thanks to her correction, he remained at an advantage. She insisted. His partner gets a share, but without leverage, without the ability to dictate terms. And Richard agreed without arguments. It was fair. And in that, maturity. One day she was walking down the corridor, past the restroom where she once started. A young woman came toward her. A new cleaning service employee. In her hands, a bucket and mop. She stopped, hesitated, recognizing Susan. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here." Susan smiled. "I also worked here and did quite well." "Don't worry." The woman laughed. And then, after thinking, asked, "And what do you work as now?" "I just help those who listen to me," said Susan, and continued on, not looking back. At home, she turned on the desk lamp, took out an old folder. In it were clippings from textbooks, printouts with references, tables that she had collected back in college. Now they were needed again. Susan knew she wouldn't become famous, wouldn't write a book, but that wasn't important, because now she was herself again, and she no longer needed to play a role. She was simply seen, heard, and respected. What do you think? At what moment did Richard truly see who was standing before him? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, many more stories coming soon.